Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of traditional interview series of South Asia Research Institute for Minorities, SARIM. I'm your host, Furqan Ahmed. I'm working as a senior research associate at SARIM. Since it's our first interaction with our distinguished guest, let me quickly introduce our organization. SARIM is a research organization having the vision of defending the rights of minorities of South Asia. The Institute aims towards highlighting the plight of and victimization faced by marginalized minority communities, SARIM, through a regular updated database publication of annual reports, annual international conferences, seminars, and webinars with field experts and researchers, promote the culture of constructive dialogue to highlight the issues of vulnerabilities faced by minority communities and to raise voice to safeguard their rights, specifically within South Asian countries. It is an honor for us to have Professor Oscar Pérez de la Fuente, all the way from Spain. It really is an honor for us to have you, sir. Professor Oscar is an assistant professor of legal philosophy at Carlos III University of Madrid, Spain. He is an avid researcher and has written multiple books on cultural pluralism, inclusion, and minorities, and many other as well. So without further ado, I would now hand over the mic to our distinguished guest by asking him about himself initially, and then we can move on to our proceedings. So, sir, can you please briefly introduce yourself to our audience? As we all know that you have achieved so many accolades and having served for 27 years in academic life, it requires a lot of consistency and patience. Please focus through that journey.
Okay, this journey began with one high school teacher of philosophy that it was incredibly charismatic for me, and he taught me how to understand philosophy as a way of life, as an activity to understand life. And then I was in the first class, in the first graduate class of the University Pompeu Fabra, that it's a prestigious university in Barcelona. And then I have a grant in this Pompeu Fabra University in the Philosophy of Law group. And finally, I finished my doctoral dissertation in Carlos III University, and I have been in Carlos III University for 22 years. And I would like to stress in my years in the university, my academic life, that I have a very international background. I try always to go to international congress as the UBR of the Philosophy of Law International Association, World Association, and the IPSA Political Science World Congress, the IPSA Congress. And I think it's very important for the academy to have an international exchange and to contrast your ideas with another scholars. And I think this is very important for us. And it's very important also to be in touch with the scholars for any part of the world. And I think this is academy, this is a scholarship. In my topics, my doctoral thesis was about cultural pluralism and right of minorities. I have developed different ideas about these topics. Now I am very interested in free speech and hate speech, and also I am interested in legal interpretation. And finally, I would like to say that, I actually am not assistant professor. I am associate professor in Carlos III University. And currently, I am the chair of the Research Committee 26 on Human Rights of the International Political Science Association, that I think is a good way to be in touch with the international academic community and with scholars on human rights and with activists on human rights.
So yeah, I mean, it's a good way to engage scholars throughout the world. So I will now quickly move on to another question. Please enlighten us on what has motivated you to have your own website, which is www.carlosperedelafonte.com. As you have uploaded almost everything related to your work, what were the major push and pull factors behind this? Like, what was the motivation factor behind this?
Okay, yeah, my website is www.oscarperezelafuente.com, and you can find there my works that are in open access. And there is a podcast, there is a blog, there is the information of a collection in an editorial. Well, the main idea is that nowadays, if you are not in the website, if you are not on the net, you are not available. And if you are an academic, you would like that your ideas are well spreaded, that your ideas are known by the academic community. And finally, you are going to be quoted. Well, this is what for certain people is important in the academic life, that you are going to be quoted, because this is important in certain database of journal. But I think that the main idea for the academic life is that if you have some ideas, if you have some analysis, if you have worked certain concepts that, for example, today we are going to discuss, these ideas should be spread in the best way. Nowadays, the best way to spread ideas is the net. And I have a YouTube channel that you can find the webinars that I organize, that you can find my workshop on cultural pluralism and right of minorities. I have a podcast, I have a blog, I have a collection in an editorial, a printed collection. And I think this is the way that the ideas in the academic world could be spread extensively.
Yeah, I mean, since we are living in the digital world, so it is a better way to connect through this domain, like having website or having a YouTube channel, would definitely not only cut down your time for meeting people, or to increase your voice. It basically would provide more audience who would be interested in knowing you and your work as well. So yeah, it's a better way to do it. And yeah, thank you so much for uploading our today's topic as well. Um, Moving on to our next question, since it's a topic of the wavering struggles of minorities and marginalized communities. So I'm going to quickly move on to our cultural rights. So talking about cultural and religious rights, how important is it to preserve and protect both rights simultaneously?
Well, this is a very interesting question. And is a current question in different societies, especially in Europe, but in other societies. I think this is important with the balance of rights. What happens if one right is in one direction, another right is in another direction? No, I am very Aristotelian. I learn from the practice. I learn from the cases. I learn from the particular. And I would like to put two examples that maybe are a bit controversial, but I think we can learn from these examples. One is the case of blasphemy and free speech. For example, we have the cases in France of blasphemy and free speech. And the other case is the case of the Muslim veil, or in generally the cases of identity and gender, generally speaking. Okay, I have worked both difficult cases, and I think it's important to have not an extreme position, but a moderate position in these cases. This means, of course, we can defend the free speech, or we can defend the individual rights of the women, of course. But also we have to understand that we have to respect the minority religious freedom. And we have to think that women are in communities, or women are in societies, and the best way is that these societies should evolve in a progressive way. And the best solution, for example, in the case of the Muslim veil, is no prohibition, no imposition. This means no prohibition in France, no imposition in Saudi Arabia. This means the Muslim women should decide if they want to wear a veil or not. That will be my point. This means that we have to balance rights. We have to balance rights between cultural and religious rights. And we have to find a solution. And my approach to find this solution is very difficult in intercultural evaluation to give a solution a priori in all the cases. But my solution is a moderate solution and a pragmatic solution from the experience of the people. You can find a solution without renouncing to the individual rights, but trying to find a certain pragmatic solution that improve the rights of the minorities.
Agree with what you said. And also those solutions that you mentioned about moderate and pragmatic, it has to be in a way, it has to follow case-to-case studies. So yeah, I totally agree with what you've just pointed out. In terms of, you've given us some example of those countries as well, so which is quite, signifies the your research and findings in this cultural and religious rights as well. So it's another say interrelated question, that can it be possible to consider tolerance as a catalyst to peace building in order to establish a pluralistic society?
The topic of tolerance was very important in the type of the Enlightenment from the wars of religion in the 16th century, and the time of the Enlightenment in the 17th century, 18th century in Europe. There were some Enlightenment intellectuals like Locke or Voltaire who have works about tolerance. And the problem in that time was how can we live together if all we are religious fanatics? Can we live together if all we are religious fanatics of different religions? And in that time, the solution was the social contract. The solution was liberalism. The solution was separation between a public sphere and a private sphere, in which we agree in the values of the public sphere, and in the private sphere, we can develop our private beliefs, our religious beliefs, our plan of life, our idea of salvation or a religious idea, always without interfering the freedom of others. That's the social contract, or that's the view of the liberalism. And I think tolerance is an important virtue for organizing different societies. However, I have to mention that in Spain, there is an intellectual that is called Javier de Lucas, that is an expert in cultural pluralism. He has an idea against tolerance as a public virtue, because he thinks that in the public sphere, we have rights. We don't have tolerance. If I go to a cafeteria and I said, I tolerate that this person of this race are taking a coffee besides me, I tolerate this situation, I am a racist, and this is not a situation of tolerance, this is a situation of rights. This person can take the coffee because he has the right to take the coffee in the cafeteria. I cannot interfere in his life. Then tolerance has an idea of supporting, has an idea of that you don't like to do something, but you finally do something for pragmatic reasons. You
like
have
acceptance, right? You have to have that acceptance.
Yeah, but the idea is that in the first instance, you want to forbid something, but finally you permit something. This is an idea of negative tolerance. And for example, there are other authors in Spain that talk about positive tolerance and negative tolerance. Negative tolerance means that you want to forbid and you finally accept. And the positive tolerance means that you learn from the difference. And I think this is a good idea also, that you can learn from the difference.
Yeah, I mean, you basically me a new mode of, or rather, given us a new mode of understanding the rights and tolerance. You said it right. We have the rights, but we don't have the tolerance. For tolerance, we have to accept the other individual. For instance, the example that you've quoted about the coffee, that a person has a right to take the coffee to the cafe, right? That's his right. And if a person, if I'm a person who's watching that person, I have to tolerate his right and accept his right, what he's been doing. So yeah, forgive something and forget something is another way that I've just learned about these narrations or the notions about tolerance and rights. Since the majority, again, it's about tolerance and all that. Since the majority has a huge role to play in order to be able to impose, regulate, and implement certain constitutional obligations in a state which requires minorities' adherence. What are the prospects of amending those obligations if the faction of minorities rise against those provisions and believe that they are being downplayed? How would you take that, or how would you elaborate that?
Uh, I think this is also a current debate in different societies. We have a dichotomy, we have a struggle in our societies. Sometimes we don't know, we don't realize that sometimes constitution and democracy are not in the same direction, or majorities and rights are not in the same direction. This means that sometimes majorities could go against rights. This, for example, is the case of populism, for example, in Hungary or Poland, in which, for example, in Poland, the government uses the majority to restrain the independence of the judiciary. Or, for example, in the populism in Latin America, the government uses the minority to extend the mandates of the president in the case of the presidentialism. Well, this also affects the interpretation of rights and the interpretation of rights of minorities. And the problem is what Kelsen says about the tyranny of majority. When the majority uses its power to dominate the situation and to restrain the rights of minorities. And this happens sometimes. Sometimes, and I think there are some authors, what is called constitutionalism, that here we have authors like Robert Alexi, Ronald Dworkin, Luigi Ferraioli, who are in the line to say that they should be respected, the Constitution, they should interpret it by the judge, and this should be stronger than certain majorities in controversial cases that give certain definitions that could go against minorities and impartiality.
Absolutely. As you've said, the constitution and democracy has different application in different countries, and explained about pluralism in Latin America, and explain pluralism and the cultural, rights in other European countries as well. So yeah, in majority of the countries, it's still very rampant and still on the cards when people or countries like these use these as a tool to implement things or to implement certain constitutional amendments as well. So yeah, you said it right in this case as well. Uh, Moving on, while I was exploring about your work, I have noticed I came across a jargon that talks about alterophobia. What it is actually, and what are the different forms of alterophobia? This is for our viewers.
Yeah. Okay. For altero means other, phobia means hate. This is hate the other. And okay, I arrived to this term because I was exploring the idea of cosmopolitan virtue, and I was exploring the idea of ethics of alterity. I think in globalization times, we have certain ideas that we have to understand. For example, in the hybridation, for example, the connection between identity and territory is quite ambiguous, less than in the past. And nowadays we have this idea. We have certain proposals from the political cosmopolitanism or the genuine cosmopolitanism, but maybe this is very, for some people, this is very utopic, because cosmopolitanism is a cold loyalty. And my proposal is a cosmopolitan virtue. This means cosmopolitanism is a moral virtue. And what consists this moral virtue? This moral virtue consists in treat other as you want to be treated. Well, this is the golden rule, but my specific idea is that some values, some ideologies, some system could be legitimate in the way that they treat the other, in the way that they treat the other. This is the ethics of alterity. And I arrived to the golden rule, for example, that maybe we can discuss later. And the second point is the solidarity with the other. Traditionally, we are solidarians with people of our group. We are solidarians with us. However, my proposal in globalization times is that we need to be solidarian with the other, with the alterity. Okay, this is the cosmopolitan virtue and the ethics of alterity. What is the opposite of the cosmopolitan virtue and the ethics of alterity? The alterophobia. What means alterophobia? Hate the other. What are the forms of alterophobia? Misogyny, hate to women, racism, hate to people of different races, xenophobia, hate to strangers or to foreigners, homophobia, hate to LGBTI, or hate to people with disability, between others, because this is an open list. Could be other cases of hate. This hate is not something abstract. This hate, for example, promotes or encourages hate speech on the net. And for example, I am currently searching for online misogyny and online hate speech against persons with disabilities. And I think it's a very interesting topic that for me is incredible, but there are certain people that put misogynist message online or put message against people with disabilities online. And this hate also is not abstract, it's something specific. And the something specific is behind these types of hate. There are certain cultural patterns. For example, behind misogyny is patriarchalism. We have different patterns, different cultural patterns with this, and these cultural patterns create stereotypes and prejudice. Cultural stereotypes and prejudice. And these cultural stereotypes and prejudice are the origin of discriminations for people of minorities.
Wow, that is amazing. First of all, I really wish you all the best for your research on misogyny, on people with a person with disability, especially women. You're talking about, right? Specific gender, women with disabilities, and the kind of issues or the hate or the prejudice that they go through virtually or physically as well. So it really would be an intriguing, research coming up from your end. So moving on to another question about your work again. In Age of Human Rights Journal, you've categorically adumbrated the difference between deliberative democracy and the politics of identity. You've also concluded that democracy must speak the language of inclusion, and highlighted that both notions still carry some contradictions in their approach, particularly some implicit rules and values that serve to exclude the views of minorities. Can you please explain or help us identifying those implicit rules and values?
Maybe I think first I would like to explain this language of inclusion. Maybe it's a bit misleading to talk about democracy and inclusion. In order to understand the origins of democracy, you know that democracy appears in the polis of Athens in the ancient Greece, and they were the citizens with all political, economic, and civil rights. We have the slaves that they don't have rights and they are property of the citizens, and we have the metecos, the foreigners, that they have some rights. This means that the majority of the population were excluded from democracy in the origin. In the alignment, there was a restricted suffrage for economic reasons, and the majority of the population were excluded from democracy. From the 20th century, we have a universal suffrage, male and female can vote over 18 years. And this is very important, and we think that it's the most legitimate system of government. But now, for example, are excluded immigrants from the political rights. Okay, this is an introduction. This is the background. No, historically, democracy has not been always the synonymous of inclusion. That's my first point. My second point is that there is a liberal democracy and a deliberative democracy. Liberal democracy is a democracy in which every 4 years people vote in a private act that it's voting, and they vote according to their private interest. This is liberal democracy, pluralist democracy. This is Robert Dahl, Schumpeter. This is the current institutions, the current approach to the representative democracy. There is an alternative that is deliberative democracy, that it's Habermas, Nino, that it's maybe participatory democracy of Berber. Okay, this idea is that people are reasonable and rational, and if we meet with certain rules, of discussion, we can arrive to a reasonable outcome in our discussion, in our deliberation. The most political, the most important political act is deliberation. And with deliberation, we can arrive at better outcomes. Okay, this is the deliberative democracy, different from the liberal democracy. This is my second point. And my third point is that I follow the criticism of Iris Marion Young in Democracy and Inclusion. He criticized this deliberative democracy because could be prejudicial, could be bad for minorities. And what is the ways of discrimination of this deliberative democracy? The ways are formal and substantive exclusion for the members of minorities. The examples that Iris Marion Young put is that usually we think in a deliberative democracy that are a group of gentlemen, usually white gentlemen, discussing like an academic event, and maybe the members of minority have another forms, have another manners. They want to shout, they want to go to a demonstration, they want to say, we don't want this government, or we don't want this situation of injustice, I don't know. And they say that maybe politics is not a club of gentlemen. Maybe politics require other manners, other forms of protesting and other forms of showing political views. Another way in which these rules of democracy could be discriminatory for members of minorities is with concepts. And this is very interesting. Maybe in our viewers, we have students of political science or political philosophy or law. The idea of behind this concept of unity, impartiality, universality that are usually used by the doctrine, these concepts, as has been studied by the feminism, for example, could be discriminatory for the members of minority, could be not neutral for the members of minorities. And this another way in which these deliberative democracy ideals could be discriminatory for the members of minorities.
Thank you so much, sir, for comprehensively explaining us about those differences. So it will basically, enlighten our students who are, most of our viewers are from Academia of Political Science, international relations as well, and cultural studies and human rights studies as well. And this will basically help them understand about those differences. So moving on to our next question, what are the various kinds of discrimination being faced by the minority groups in general? What cultural barriers do these groups have? What are the recent trends and of discrimination, and what role your organization has been playing to curtailing discrimination against these groups?
I think, well, the categories of discrimination, I think are well known. They are well known of direct discrimination and indirect discrimination, harassment. This is well known in the anti-discriminatory law in the European Union. We have different directives with different collectives. The direct discrimination is an unjust and arbitrary treatment by some characteristics that it's something arbitrary or unjust. The indirect discrimination is a treatment that it seems to be neutral, but impact adversely to the members of the minority. And the harassment is a kind of attack or hostility to the members of minority for certain characteristics. No, this forms part of the anti-discriminatory law. There is a question you asked me something that it's interesting. What cultural barriers do these groups have? Okay, I would like to explain that I am defending a theory of justice based on Fraser and Iris Van Young, Nancy Fraser and Iris Van Young, a theory of justice explaining that there are three types of injustice: in political injustice, economic injustice, and cultural injustice. This means inclusion, redistribution, and recognition. And in my view, the dichotomy between social minorities and cultural minorities is a bit misleading. And I am in favor to consider that all minorities are could be cultural and social. And I prefer to study all minorities from these views of inclusion, political injustice, redistribution, economic injustice, and recognition, cultural injustice. That's my approach to the question that have been developing in different papers. About the question of what my organization can do against this discrimination, for example, I belong to a human rights institute called Gregorio Peces Barba in Carlos III University. And this institute has promoting great research on persons of disabilities, has developed different scholarships, different scholarship work and also research projects on persons of disabilities, and it has been awarded in different instances for this important task of research on the persons of disabilities between other collective and human rights. And specifically about the International Political Science Association, the Research Committee 26 on Human Rights, which I am the chair, we are organizing seminars and webinars on human rights. And for example, we are going to publish in April 2023 a book in the prestigious English editorial Routledge, a book from one of these webinars on free speech, minorities, and the internet. And now this December, we will have a webinar on digital inequalities. Always, for me, is important the approach of minorities. And you are really welcome to this webinar on the 6th and 8th of December on digital inequalities. You have the information in my website, and you are welcome to this webinar. And my idea is, with webinars and seminars, we can fight against discrimination, because we need a good theory in order to intervene in the practice of human rights. We have to connect the theory of human rights to the practice of human rights.
Wow, that's amazing. I would love to participate. I don't know if I'm allowed to participate. I would love to join those webinars, and I would love to listen and to learn more on this. Going on to another question as well about the hate speech and all that stuff. You've just talked about, and you've just briefly talked about those, how it indulged. So how does hate speech have become prevalent in our societies, with a special reference to Global South? Since I am from Global South and witnessed numerous instances of hate speech against religious minorities and marginalized communities, why have we lost this sense of acceptance and social solidarity?
I would like to make 3 points. The first one is, okay, before I mentioned my idea of cosmopolitan virtue, that cosmopolitanism is a virtue, and this idea of ethics of alterity that some view is legitimate in the way that they treat the other or the others, the alterity. I have a paper on the Golden Rule. I have studied the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is universal. In all religions, we have, in almost all religions, we have certain expressions of the Golden Rule. And there are different expressions. One idea is, treat others as you want to be treated. This is the Golden Rule. Treat others as the other treats you. This is the Iron Rule. And treat others as the others want to be treated. This is the Platinum Rule. And for example, if you are a vegan or a vegetarian and you invite someone to your house, maybe your guest doesn't like the vegetables or doesn't especially like the vegetables. But if you follow the Golden Rule, you say, treat others as you want to be treated. You think that the best for the others is what you like. And you put vegetables to your guest. And maybe your guest doesn't like vegetables. Okay, this means that the Golden Rule is a bit particularistic. You need common ground. And this is my second point. We don't have a sense of acceptance on social solidarity because we have lost common values or common ground. We don't identify the other as someone from our group or someone from the common humanity. One of my chapters of my doctoral thesis was about the liberal communitarian debate between Rawls, McIntyre, Walser, Sandel, and Taylor. And the idea, the communitarians and the liberals. And the idea is that if the questions of identity are treated if the definition of who we are treated in a way exclusive, in a way that don't permit common grounds, this is a source of problems. This could be a source of problems. And my idea, for example, with solidarity is that this is something from Rorty, from Richard Rorty. Richard Rorty says, I can be solidarian from someone of my group, but I cannot be solidarian for all humanity. I can be solidarian from one of my group. If you want that I be more solidarian, then you have to enhance, you have to alert my group. My group should be bigger, and I could be more solidarian. Okay, I am against this idea. I think solidarity, if you want to make worthy solidarity, you should be solidarian with others. But the idea that we have an identity and we have an alterity should be defined in a more dynamic way, in a more common ground approach way.
So quickly moving on to another question. We basically have very few minutes, not very few minutes. We have like specifically 25 minutes to be precise. So yeah, what is the International Covenant of Civil Rights and Political Rights, Civil and Political Rights, which is ICCPR? Does it derive from the inherent dignity of human person with special focus of self-discrimination? What are the odds of convincing Global South, which are acting opposite to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
Yeah, well, this is a question of universalism. I have debates with my students with universalism. I have some students of mine are from Latin America. And it's quite interesting because we have debates about the universalism of human rights. And there are two ideas. The first one is human rights are based in the great idea of equal dignity of human beings. And for example, there are some authors that says that the caste system in India is something particular, and we cannot judge from the outside the caste system in India. I am against this idea, and I think the human rights are universal and could be enforced in any part of the world. However, there is another. This is one point. Another point is the accusation of human rights as ethnocentric. This is particularly important in Asia because they say, okay, these human rights came from Western civilization or from Western countries, and they are Western. They don't come from our views. Okay, this is a pro hominem argument. The idea that, for example, I explain to my students, if the pasta come from Italy, is okay, but you can eat pasta, you can eat spaghetti in China or in India, or if you use an aspirin, maybe the aspirin come from Western countries, but you can use an aspirin in any part of the world. This means the origin of an idea or the origin of a product doesn't mean if this product could be enforced or could be useful in that society on this part of the world. No. However, I would like to make a point in the idea that rights are universal in a thin way and should be interpreted thick in an intercultural way. Are universal in a thin way. This is an idea of Michael Walzer. He has a book about this. rights are thin in a universal way and should be interpreted in a thick way. I think I have another question in which I can speak more about this.
Okay, that's great. So let's move on to another question. Uh, in the presence of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, yeah, which is inalienable, indivisible, independent, and interrelated. Yet the violations of these human rights principles are rampant and openly violated by South Asian countries, particularly India, and specifically against the rights of freedom of expression and religion. What is your take on that? Yeah, it's an interrelated question.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to distinguish between human rights that are moral claims recognized on an international level and fundamental rights that are constitutional rights recognized in the Constitution at a national level. We need that the majority of the human rights should be fundamental rights. This is our desire. And then the problem is a problem of efficacy of the fundamental rights at the national level. However, if the problem is the inefficacy of human rights in certain countries, I think it's a question for activism, it's a question for scholarship, it's a question for denounce, it's a question for the supranational organizations, if it's a question for the international court. It's a question of legitimacy. I think it's a question of legitimacy and it's a question of efficacy of human rights.
Yeah, thank you so much. It really is. So quickly, there's another question about the hate speech. At the dawn of the internet age, optimists believed that the internet would democratize knowledge, right? It would allow new compelling voices to emerge uninhibited by powerful entrenched interest, just as previous communication technologies and mediums like the printing press to radio, television had done before. How do you perceive this statement? So do you really think that internet have let us down in terms of balancing or democratization of those rights?
Okay, I will answer this question with arguments in favor and against. I don't have a definitive answer. There is a wise man called Umberto Eco that it was a scholar, Italian scholar. He has a book of integrated and apocalyptic. He talked about the integrated and apocalyptic. There are integrated on the internet and apocalyptic on the internet. I am not any of this. The idea is that internet has good points, great possibilities, like the information and data has become cheap, easy, and quick. This is a good point, I think, without further development. However, the bad point is ignorant people may be easily manipulated. We have fake news and we have misinformation. And then this means that we need education to use internet. And this is very interesting because this is the same that in the ancient Greece with Plato and the sophists, Plato and democracy. Plato feared the sophists or feared democracy because the people could be easily manipulated. Now we have a similar situation.
I totally agree with you. Like, a lot of ignorant people or people with less knowledge can be easily manipulated with those with the availability of those mediums. So again, that's another interrelated question to the hate speech or the availability of hate speech on internet. So speaking of hate on the internet, do you really consider social media as a catalyst to hate speech that leads to discrimination against minorities and to control these social media based crimes against humanity in South Asia in general? And particularly in India and particularly?
Okay, I think this is a question of regulation on the net. There are a freedom approach that they say internet should be unrestricted. And there is a human rights approach that they say human rights should be enforced also on the net. And this is the United Nations approach. And this means that sometimes hate speech should be prohibited on the net. However, as you know, internet is global and the national legislations are local. And for example, we have the Yahoo case in which there was a Nazi auction, and there was a case in France in which demands to Yahoo to close a Nazi auction in Yahoo servers. And Yahoo says, okay, we are an American company, we are in American servers, we are regulated by American law. And American law permits a Nazi auction, and there is no case. This means internet is global, legislation are local. My point is, should be cases of self-regulation. For example, the agreement of the platforms like Yahoo, Twitter, and so on, and the European Union to control hate speech in these platforms. These ways of self-regulation and these ways of self-regulate the net could be a good point in order to avoid, to fight against hate speech on the net. I think it's a difficult question because it's difficult to put rules on the net because it's a new dimension for rules and for the law.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been some incidents as well, some case studies, you could say, that have really came across, which basically jolted the system to, you've rightly said, that has to be self-regularized instead of, imposing some regulations on the users of the internet. So to some extent, governments, some countries, as you said, must use those examples or those technologies to at least, I won't say, put a halt on it, at least to put some limitations or some restrictions as well. If I'm saying it right in terms of, speaking of human rights. Otherwise, it would lead us to, to a negative point of view or the negative comments, right? So the last question, what steps need to be taken by the United Nation and the European Union to bind the global south to mitigate the violations of human rights laws, especially against child labor and religious persecution?
Okay, I think this is a very interesting question. I think we have to avoid the hypocrisy and the double standard. And this is something danger for the Western countries. We can have the good conscience that we can think that in our countries human rights could be enforced without major problem. However, we can buy products for multinational companies who employ children in third world countries. And we have to be aware of these situations because maybe our welfare in the Western countries is in exchange of the poverty or in exchange of certain human rights violations in third world countries. And maybe we have to think that if we defend the idea of universality of human rights, is for everyone. There is no exclusions. And universality, interdependence of human rights means that they should be enforced for the children in the global south and for the children in Europe. My point is that I think I mentioned before, human rights are universal in a thin way and should be interpreted interculturally in a thick way. This is an idea of Michael Walzer, and I have developed it in several works. No? However, we have an acceptable alternative. This means there are things that are morally wrong, universally morally wrong. The relativistic argument doesn't work. This means that the values are internal to a society or a culture. This is not always true, or this is not true. The values are universal, and should be interpreted according to the circumstances in a thin way universally and interculturally in a thick way. And my final reflection for this kind interview is that human rights should be enforced in any part of the world. And we cannot accept double standards. The welfare of the Western countries cannot be in expenses of the global South, and we have to fight for the universality of human rights in Western countries and in the global South. In both sides, it's important to be universal these human rights.
Absolutely. I'm really grateful, first of all, and I keep on repeating this again and again. I was really excited, and we were really happy to have you, sir. Your august presence has enlightened us in many ways. So yeah, I mean, agree with you. Just talking about the international steps that are being taken. You must have gone through the Universal Periodic Review that is about to be concluded in a couple of days, right? Many of the countries are being reviewed by international organization, which is a good step to not only bind those countries, but it would help the countries who are being reviewed to implement those suggestions and again recommendations coming from not from globally, right? From worldwide. So it was a pleasure, sir, to have you. Thank you so much, sir. That's it from our end. Lovely having you. Thank you.
Okay, very well. See you. We'll be in touch.
Thank
Bye.
you so much. Bye.